The morning air inside the View studio was alive with a mixture of anticipation and caffeine-fueled energy. The audience, a mix of loyal fans and casual viewers, buzzed quietly in their seats, clutching programs and phones, whispering about the day's guest. Blake Lively, known for her charm, grace, and elegance both on and off screen, had arrived an hour early. She had spent that time in a quiet corner backstage, rehearsing answers to potential questions, rehearsing small jokes to keep the atmosphere light, and picturing the flow of the interview in her mind. She knew the show well enough to understand its rhythm, its mix of congenial chatter and sharp questions. She also knew the unpredictability. She had dealt with press before, she was prepared. Or at least, she thought she was. As she walked through the bright corridor and into the studio proper, the lights hit her first, white, piercing, almost harsh, casting elongated shadows across the polished floor. The cameras, fully manned and ready, hummed in their mounts. Blake felt that familiar tingle, the mix of adrenaline and focus that came with live television. Whoopi Goldberg greeted her with her usual warmth, enveloping Blake in a quick, reassuring hug. Joy Behar offered a big smile, one that was open yet cautious, and Sunny Hostin adjusted her papers, glancing toward Ana Navarro as if signaling that trouble might be on the horizon. And there was Ana, leaning forward slightly, her eyes sharp and calculating. That look, the one Blake recognized instantly, was the telltale sign that Ana was ready to push. Not for insight, not for conversation, but to provoke. Blake's pulse ticked faster under the calm facade she maintained. She had learned to keep her expressions neutral, her smile polished, even when tension coiled in the air around her. She took her seat at the table, crossing her legs gracefully, smoothing her dress with one hand, and letting her other rest lightly on her lap. The audience erupted in applause, rising energy reverberating against the walls. The camera operators made subtle adjustments, framing Blake perfectly as she nodded politely to the crowd, acknowledging their excitement with a warm, composed smile. Whoopi leaned in, her voice booming with enthusiasm. Blake Lively, it's so wonderful to have you here. Everyone's excited to talk about your new film and, of course, your incredible career. Blake offered a soft laugh, her voice smooth and melodic. Thank you, it's lovely to be here. The conversation began cordially, as expected. Blake spoke about her film, describing the psychological depth of her character, the intensity of the shooting schedule, and the dedication required to inhabit such a complex persona. She discussed the collaboration with her co-stars, the director's vision, and the long hours of preparation that went into every scene. The audience leaned forward, absorbed in her words. Her warmth, her intelligence, and her openness drew people in. The tension backstage seemed almost absent. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Ana Navarro spoke. Blake, Ana said, her tone deceptively gentle, you've often presented yourself as polished, elegant, a role model in many ways. But aren't you concerned that your public image sets unrealistic expectations for young women? The audience murmured softly, sensing the shift. Blake blinked once, slowly, maintaining her smile. Well, she replied carefully, I don't see it that way. I try to be genuine, but everyone has private aspects of their life. There are boundaries that I don't share publicly, and I think that's healthy. Ana leaned forward, pressing just slightly, her voice carrying the edge that Blake had anticipated. But some might say there's a disconnect. Your scene is perfect, glamorous, and composed, and then in your films, especially in this new project, you portray a character who is morally complex, even ruthless. Doesn't that send mixed messages? Blake's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She placed her hands lightly on her lap, fingers intertwined, her posture impeccable, yet her eyes flickered with a flash of something sharper. Ana, she said slowly, measured, I choose roles because they challenge me as an actor, not because they fit a particular image. Acting is storytelling. It's exploring human emotion and complexity, not creating a manual for life. Ana raised her eyebrows, leaning further. Yes, but your influence is considerable. People look up to you. Don't you feel some responsibility to the image you project? Blake's smile remained, but her voice carried more weight now, firmness threading through each word. I am responsible for my life, my family, and my own integrity. That includes the choices I make in my work. But I am not responsible for how every person interprets my roles. To suggest otherwise undermines both my craft and my life. The audience shifted, a ripple of murmured approval and quiet excitement passing through them. Joy Behar tried to diffuse the tension with a laugh. Well, I think people love seeing Blake in all her roles. The complexity is what makes her so fascinating. Anna was undeterred. I'm not denying your talent. I'm simply pointing out that some might feel your image of perfection is at odds with the morally ambiguous characters you portray. How do you reconcile that? Blake's eyes narrowed just slightly, the calm in her expression concealing the rise of frustration she felt internally. Anna, I reconcile it by being authentic in my life and professional in my work. My personal values guide how I live, but my work allows me to explore the full spectrum of humanity. They are separate, and conflating them is unfair. The audience leaned forward, sensing the tension mount. The atmosphere shifted from cordial conversation to a quiet electric charge. Blake's composure was flawless, yet the edge of her voice, the precision of her words, made it clear she was no longer willing to endure insinuations politely. Anna tilted her head, a subtle challenge in her expression. Some would argue you cultivate an untouchable perfection, and then profit from playing flawed or dark characters. Doesn't that feel a little contradictory? Blake's lips pressed lightly together, a silent sign of control, but her voice, when it came, was cool, precise, and authoritative. I do not cultivate anything. I exist authentically, and I work diligently. To suggest otherwise is to mischaracterize my intentions and my life. There is nothing contradictory about living my truth and exploring human complexity through acting. The audience gasped quietly, a few clapped softly. The energy in the studio shifted palpably, moving from intrigue to anticipation. Even Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, sensing the storm brewing, while Sunny Hostin glanced down at her notes, recognizing the tension escalating beyond casual banter. Anna's smirk flickered. So you're saying there's no conflict between your image and your roles? Blake's gaze sharpened, her patience thinned, yet she remained calm, regal. I am saying there is no conflict between honesty in my life and storytelling in my work. They serve different purposes. Questions framed as judgments, suggestions of hypocrisy, and insinuations about my integrity are not acceptable under any circumstances. The audience murmured, some leaning forward, captivated. The tension was undeniable. Blake's control of the situation, her clarity, and her quiet authority commanded attention. This was no longer just an interview, it was a demonstration of personal strength and poise under pressure. The cameras flicked back on after the commercial break, but the tension in the studio had only thickened. Blake Lively sat upright, every inch a poised, elegant figure the public admired, but her eyes were sharp, alert, and unblinking. Anna Navarro's gaze, deliberate and pointed, followed her like a predator circling, daring her to slip. The audience sensed the unspoken electricity in the room and leaned forward in their seats. Even Whoopi Goldberg, seasoned and unflappable, shifted slightly, adjusting her position as though bracing for a confrontation she already knew was imminent. Sunny Hostin flipped her cue cards, glancing subtly toward Anna with a mix of apprehension and warning, as though silently pleading for her to tread carefully. Blake inhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling in controlled rhythm, the way she had been trained to remain calm under pressure. But beneath that composed exterior, frustration simmered, a subtle heat that sharpened her focus and honed her words. She had been patient, smiling politely, answering questions with grace, but now the line had been crossed, and she would not allow herself to be provoked further. Anna leaned forward again, elbows resting on the table, eyes fixed on Blake. Blake, I want to revisit something we discussed before. You claim to value authenticity, but isn't there a disconnect between your public image and the roles you choose? Your elegance, your perfection, the way you present yourself in public, it seems at odds with the darker, morally ambiguous characters you portray. Don't you worry about the messages that sends? The audience shifted, a collective intake of breath. Some leaned forward, sensing the tension escalating. Blake's fingers tightened subtly around her dress, but her voice remained steady, cool, almost melodic in its firmness. Anna, she said deliberately, I spend my career exploring the complexities of human behavior. That includes darkness, imperfection, and moral ambiguity. My public life is my own, my work is my craft. To conflate the two and suggest that they must align perfectly is unfair and reductive. It is not my responsibility to reconcile fiction with public perception for anyone's comfort. Anna's smirk twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly. But young viewers, especially girls, look up to you. They see this ideal of perfection, your poise, your elegance, and then they watch you in roles that are morally complex. Doesn't that create confusion? Blake's jaw tightened, her voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable edge. Anna, I understand concern, but there is a distinction between influence and intrusion. I am responsible for my life, my family, and my work.